The great chamber of resonant thought was a hollowed-out moon, and within its crystalline heart, a civilization was coming undone. Light born from the planet Xylos below filtered through the kilometers-thick quartz walls, fracturing into a million prismatic sorrows that danced upon the obsidian floor. The air, a carefully composed mixture of noble gases and ionized particles, hummed not with the harmonious accord of the Zalosian conclave, but with a dissonant chord of pure, undiluted fear. At the chamber's center, suspended in a shimmering gravitic field, a sphere of swirling starlight projected the source of their terror, a single alien vessel. It was a sliver of impossible geometry, a shade of black that seemed to drink the very light around it, hanging in the void over their most sacred world. For cycles, it had sat there, a silent testament to an unknown power. And then, without provocation, without communication, without any preamble that could be deciphered by the most sensitive instruments in the known galaxy, it had opened fire. A lance of pure, coherent energy, white-hot and silent in the vacuum of space, had erupted from its prow. It did not strike the defensive platforms orbiting Xylos. It did not target the grand orbital cities or the energy collection arrays. It bypassed every military and civilian target, every logical point of strategic assault. It had lanced directly into the heart of their memory, their soul, their legacy. The archive of worlds, the moonlet that held the complete unfiltered history of every species the Zalosians had ever encountered, including their own. The beam had pierced its crust and vanished into its core, and then silence. The human ship resumed its inscrutable vigil, unmoved, uncommunicative, a predator that had taken a single, inexplicable bite and now waited with unnerving patience. "It is an act of war," strategist Kalen's resonant voice chimed, sharp and discordant, a shard of glass in the chamber's otherwise fluid acoustics. His form, a tall, elegant structure of polished, jet-black exoskeleton, vibrated with contained fury. The light from Xylos caught the edges of his carapace, making him seem both a warrior and a shadow. "An attack on our very essence. They have violated our history. They have assaulted our spirit. What further proof do we require of their barbarism? The Grand Fleet must be mobilized. We must answer this insult with overwhelming, undeniable force." The sentiment echoed through the chamber, a wave of agreement rippling through the assembled resonators of the conclave. Their own crystalline forms, each unique in its facets and internal light, pulsed with a synchronized, angry crimson. Fear had curdled into rage. The unknown was terrifying, but a direct attack, however bizarre, was something they could understand. It was something they could meet with fire. "And what would that accomplish, strategist?" A softer, more melodic resonance countered. It was Archivist Lyra, her form more slender than Kalen's, her exoskeleton the color of pale, moon-kissed ivory. She stood near the edge of the central projection, her gaze fixed on the motionless human ship. "We would destroy them, yes. Our fleet is the culmination of millennia of technological supremacy, but we would learn nothing. We would be acting on the very impulse they may have intended to provoke." An unthinking, reflexive strike. "They fired upon the archive?" Kalen retorted, his resonance causing fine dust motes to dance in the air. "They did not strike a military target where a response in kind would be expected. They struck a symbol, a repository of peace and knowledge. This was not a strategic move. It was an act of profound contempt. They are telling us that our knowledge, our history, means nothing to them." Prime Resonator Valerius, his form larger than the others, his crystalline structure shot through with veins of what looked like captured starlight, remained silent at the apex of the chamber. He was the focus of the conclave's collective will, the synthesizer of their disparate thoughts into a unified course of action. For cycles, he had held them in this state of deliberation, resisting the growing clamor for war. The weight of a billion souls, of an empire that had not known true conflict for eons, rested upon the resonance of his voice. He felt the dissonance in the chamber as a physical pain, a grinding sickness in the core of his being. The harmony of his people was fracturing, and the humans were the cause. These humans, they had emerged from their distant, unremarkable star system with a speed that defied known physics, their technology a strange patchwork of brute force principles and bafflingly elegant theoretical applications. They were a paradox. They used crude chemical rockets for orbital insertion, and yet possessed faster-than-light travel that left no detectable wake. Their communications were a chaotic storm of unsecured, emotionally charged broadcasts, yet their single exploratory vessel moved with a silence and purpose that bespoke immense discipline. The conclave had studied them from afar, as they did all new species. The initial assessment had been dismissive. They were a young race, loud, fractious, seemingly on the brink of self-annihilation. Their history was a litany of conflict, a stark contrast to the Xylosians' long, unbroken peace. They were deemed interesting but not significant. A minor species to be observed and perhaps in a few millennia guided toward enlightenment. Then their ship had appeared in the Xylos system. One ship, not a fleet, not a diplomatic convoy, a solitary vessel. It had broadcast nothing but a simple, repeating mathematical sequence, the prime numbers, a universal greeting card that said, "We are intelligent." It was a greeting so primitive, so fundamentally basic, that it was almost insulting. And then it had fallen silent, waiting. The conclave, in its infinite patience, had decided to observe, to debate the proper protocol for a first contact of this nature. They had debated for one full rotation of Xylos around its sun. And at the precise moment the cycle of debate was to be renewed, the human ship had fired. "Lyra is right," Valerius finally resonated, his tone a deep, calming bass that momentarily quelled the rising tide of anger. The crimson pulses in the chamber softened to a troubled violet. "Their action is illogical. It does not fit any known model of interstellar aggression. If they wished to cripple us, they would have struck our energy relays. If they wished to subjugate us, they would have targeted our government on Xylos. If they wished to test our defenses, they would have engaged the fleet platforms. They did none of these things. They chose a target that has immense symbolic value to us, but no strategic value whatsoever." He shifted his immense form, the starlight within him swirling. "Think," he commanded, his voice filling every corner of the vast chamber. "Consider their perspective. They sent a single vessel into the heart of the most powerful empire in this galactic arm, one ship against a civilization that could extinguish their sun. This is either the act of unparalleled arrogance or unparalleled confidence. Or," he paused, letting the weight of his next word settle, "it is something else entirely. An act not of aggression, but of communication. A message we are failing to understand." "What message is conveyed by a weapon discharge?" Kalen scoffed, though the fury in his resonance was now tempered with a grudging respect for the prime Resensor's logic. "It is the most primal, unambiguous message in the universe. It says, we are a threat." "Or perhaps," Lyra countered softly, "it says, look here." They fired at the archive, the single greatest repository of data in the galaxy, data from thousands of worlds spanning millions of years. What if the message was not the act of firing, but the target itself? What if they are trying to draw our attention to something within our own history, something we have overlooked? The chamber fell silent again, the concept hanging in the air. It was a deeply unsettling thought. The Xylosians were a species defined by their knowledge, their meticulous curation of history. The idea that they could have missed something vital within their own archives was anathema. It suggested a flaw in their very nature. Valerius felt the undercurrent of that fear. He felt it in himself. For generations, the conclave's harmony had been fraying at the edges. Debates that were once swift and logical had become protracted and emotional. Old philosophical schisms, long since resolved, were re-emerging. A subtle paranoia was creeping into their society. They had dismissed it as the ennui of a civilization that had reached its zenith, a kind of cultural sickness born of peace and perfection. But now, in the stark, silent judgment of the human ship, he wondered if it was something more. He wondered if this internal decay was a symptom of a deeper malaise, one the humans had somehow perceived from across the gulf of space. "They have not moved since the discharge," Valerius stated, his gaze returning to the projected image. "They have not powered their weapons again, they have not raised any defensive shields, they are simply waiting. They fired a single shot and now they wait for our response. It is a test, I believe, not of our military strength but of our wisdom. They have placed the next move in our hands, and our choice will define us not only to them but to ourselves." He turned his attention to Kalen. "Strategist, you believe them to be barbarians. A barbarian would have sent a fleet. A barbarian would have rained fire upon our cities. A barbarian would have issued demands. These humans have done none of that. They have performed a single, precise, and deeply confusing action. We must not respond as barbarians ourselves. We will not mobilize the grand fleet." A wave of dissent, a low, angry hum rose from the assembled resonators. Kalen's form stiffened, his internal light flaring. "Prime Resonator, this is a grave error. Your caution will be interpreted as weakness. They will see our inaction as an invitation for further aggression." "Then let them," Valerius resonated, his voice unwavering, cutting through the dissent. "Let them prove you right and me wrong, but we will not be the ones to escalate this encounter from a mystery into a war. We are the Xylosian conclave. We are a civilization of thought, of reason." We will exhaust every possibility, every interpretation before we resort to the crude language of violence. Archivist Lyra, he said, turning his attention to her, you will lead this investigation. Take your most trusted archivists. Go to the Archive of Worlds. Examine the point of impact. Analyze the energy signature. Scour the historical records for anything at all that might explain this. The answer to why they fired is not in the void between our worlds, but perhaps in the history we have so carefully preserved. Lyra bowed her elegant form, a gesture of deep respect. It will be done, Prime Resonator. And we will all wait, Valerius concluded, his gaze sweeping across the tense assembly. We will wait, and we will watch, and we will listen. The humans have asked the galaxy a question with their action. It is our duty as the galaxy's oldest stewards to find the answer. The chamber remained fraught with tension, the violet light of uncertainty clinging to every surface. High above, the image of the solitary human ship hung in the stardusted darkness, a silent, damning enigma. It had fired a shot that had shaken the foundations of an empire, and in doing so, had started a war not for territory or resources, but for the very soul of the Xylosian people. The question was not whether they would survive an attack from humanity, but whether they could survive the attack on their own certainty, their own perception of themselves as the wise, unassailable masters of their destiny. The journey to the Archive of Worlds was a pilgrimage of dread for Lyra. Her vessel, a sleek shard of silver, cut through the void, its passage silent and somber. Before her the moonlit grew in the viewport, a familiar, comforting sight now marred by a deep psychic wound. The archive was a perfect sphere, its surface a mosaic of luminescent panels, each containing a fragment of history, a song, a law, a poem from a dead civilization. It was a place of profound silence and reverence. Now that silence felt different. It felt violated. As her ship drew closer, the damage became apparent. It was not a crater, not a scar of raw, explosive power. Where the human beam had struck, the surface was not melted or shattered. It was clean. A perfectly circular aperture, meters in diameter, had been carved into the moonlet's crust. The edges were impossibly smooth, as if the material had not been blasted away but simply erased from existence. There was no residual radiation, no thermal blooming, no particulate matter. It was a wound of pure, cold nullity. The energy readings are non-existent, her lead technician chimed from the sensor station, his voice laced with disbelief. The beam imparted no kinetic force, no thermal energy. It's as if a cylinder of reality was simply removed. Lyra moved closer to the viewport, her mind struggling to process the information. A weapon that leaves no trace, a force that unmakes matter. This was not the technology of barbarians. This was something far beyond their understanding. Her team descended into the archive's core through the newly formed tunnel. The interior of the moonlet was a vast, crystalline lattice, a library of light where data was stored in the atomic structure of the crystals themselves. The beam had carved a perfectly straight path through it all, bisecting millennia of records without disturbing the adjacent structures. It was surgical, a scalpel, not a club. They reached the terminus of the beam's path, deep in the heart of the archive. The tunnel ended abruptly, and at its end, something pulsed with a soft, ethereal light. It was a small sphere of contained energy left behind by the beam. It hummed with a complex, layered frequency that Lyra's senses interpreted as an invitation. "It's a communication package," the technician reported, his resonance trembling. "Pure data, no encryption, it seems to be waiting for us." With a gesture of command, Lyra instructed her team to interface with the sphere. The moment the connection was made, a flood of information poured into their ship systems and onto the main view screen in the chamber of resonant thought, where Valerius and the entire conclave watched in stunned silence. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a list of demands. It was a medical diagnosis. The data stream began with complex biological and information theory models, far in advance of anything the Xylosians had ever conceived. It showed waveforms, mimetic structures, and patterns of synaptic decay. It showed how a non-biological, information-based parasite could propagate through a society's communication networks, subtly altering thought patterns, amplifying paranoia, eroding logic, and fostering aggression. It called the contagion the sickness of the mind, a plague that did not kill the body, but hollowed out the soul of a civilization, turning it inward upon itself until it tore itself apart in civil war and despair. Then the data shifted. It showed a map of the Xylosian Empire. A sickly reddish energy, invisible to their own sensors, pulsed through their networks, It was concentrated most heavily here in the Archive of Worlds, the central node of their entire civilization's shared consciousness. The human data showed how this sickness had been slowly corrupting their history, subtly altering records, deleting inconvenient truths, and rewriting their past to create a narrative of supreme, unassailable exceptionalism. It was why their debates had grown so fractious. It was why their harmony was failing. They were not suffering from cultural ennui, they were infected. Their entire civilization was running a fever of the mind, and they had mistaken the symptoms for simple political disagreement. The final part of the data package was a simulation. It showed the human ship arriving. It modeled the Zalosian response. If they had sent a fleet, the simulation showed the sickness amplifying Zalosian paranoia to fever pitch, triggering an immediate, overwhelming attack. If they had sent a message of warning, the sickness would have caused the Conclave to perceive it as a trick, a psychological attack, and they would have retaliated. Any conventional diplomatic approach was doomed to fail, filtered through the lens of the very disease they were trying to cure. So the humans had chosen the only option left, a single, shocking, inexplicable act. An action so bizarre it would, they hoped, bypass the reflexive, paranoid response of the sickness and force the uninfected parts of the Zalosian mind, their deep-seated curiosity and logic, to ask why. It was a gamble of galactic proportions. They had aimed a weapon at the heart of the Zalosian soul, not to destroy it, but to perform a kind of cosmic surgery. The beam, the data explained, was not a weapon at all. It was a harmonic purge, a targeted carrier wave of resonant frequencies precisely tuned to dismantle the mimetic code of the sickness, erasing it from the crystalline lattice of the archive without harming the stored data itself. They had fired on the archive because it was the heart of the infection. They had to cleanse the patient's heart before they could hope to cure the rest of the body. The sphere of light left behind was the antidote, the full data package, and the resonant frequencies needed to purge the sickness from the rest of their networks. In the chamber of resonant thought, a silence deeper and more profound than any had ever known descended. The crimson light of anger had long since faded, replaced by the cool, pale blue of dawning, horrified comprehension. They looked at the data, at the evidence of their own unseen decay, and then at the image of the human ship, still waiting, still silent. It was not an enemy, it was a physician. Kalen stood rigid, his warrior's pride shattered. His every instinct, his every argument for war had been a symptom of the disease. He had been a puppet, his strings pulled by an invisible parasite that fed on the very aggression he championed. He felt a shame so profound it threatened to extinguish the light within him. Valerius, for the first time in his long tenure as Prime Resonator, felt a sense of true awe. He had spoken of a test of wisdom, but he had never imagined this. The humans had not tested their military or their resolve. They had tested their capacity for reason in the face of their own deepest fears. And the Zalosians had, by the narrowest of margins, passed. If he had given in to the pressure, if he had listened to the fevered cries for war, his civilization would have damned itself, destroying its only hope of a cure. "Open a channel," Valerius resonated, his voice thick with an emotion the Zalosians had not collectively felt in 10,000 years. Humility. "To the human vessel, now." The channel opened with a soft chime. There was no static, no negotiation of protocols, just a clean, open carrier wave. For a long moment there was only the sound of the void. Then a voice spoke. It was not resonant, not crystalline. It was soft, calm, and carried a warmth that felt utterly alien and yet deeply reassuring. It was a female voice, speaking their language flawlessly. "This is Ambassador Eva Rostova of the Terran vessel Emissary. We receive you, Prime Resonator Valerius." Valerius felt the collective consciousness of the Conclave hold its breath. How did they know his name? How did they know their language so perfectly? But of course, they had just performed surgery on the Galactic Archive. They knew everything. "Ambassador Rostova," Valerius began, his own voice struggling to find its usual resonant authority. We have received your diagnosis. We are in your debt." The words felt inadequate, small, and fragile in the face of what had transpired. "There is no debt," the human voice replied, its calm unwavering. "We detected the mimetic contagion signatures from our listening posts on the edge of your space. Our history is rife with information warfare. We have developed immunities and the tools to fight such plagues. We saw a fellow intelligent species on the verge of self-destruction. The choice was to act or to watch you fall. We chose to act." "Your methods were extreme," Lyra chimed in from the archive, her voice filled with a scholar's wonder. The risk you took was immense. We were moments away from ordering your destruction. We know, Ambassador Rostova said, a hint of something, not sadness, but a deep, weary understanding in her voice. We analyzed over 1 million of your historical, political, and psychological texts. Our projections gave us a 73.4% probability that your leadership would hesitate long enough to seek a nonviolent explanation. It was the highest probability of success among all available options. We gambled on your wisdom, Prime Resonator. We are relieved that our gamble paid off. 73%. They had risked their ship, their lives, and the possibility of a galactic war on a 73% chance. Valerius felt a shiver run through his crystalline form. What kind of species wagered its existence on a statistical analysis of another's soul? You sent only one ship, Valerius stated, the question that had plagued them from the beginning now taking on a new, profound meaning. Why? Because a fleet would have been a threat, Rostova explained simply. A fleet would have been perceived as an invasion. It would have fed the paranoia of the sickness and made you its unwitting agents. One ship is an enigma. One ship is a question. We did not want to send you an army. We wanted to send you a puzzle. Furthermore, she added, sending a fleet would have implied that we believed you were our enemy. We did not. We believed you were a patient. You do not send a battle fleet to a hospital. The simple, undeniable logic of her words washed over the conclave. The humans were not barbarians. They were not arrogant. They were profoundly, terrifyingly logical. Their every move had been calculated with a precision that bordered on prescience. They had understood the Zalosian mind better than the Zalosians did themselves. We are beginning the purge, Valerius informed her, using the frequencies you provided, but it will take time to cleanse our entire network. We would be honored if you would assist us. We will, the ambassador replied without hesitation. The emissary will remain and offer any technical support you require. We are all in this galaxy together. A sickness that affects one will eventually affect us all. In the days that followed, a strange and unprecedented partnership was forged. The lone human ship worked in concert with the Zalosian fleet, not in battle, but in a delicate, large-scale healing. The harmonic purge was broadcast across the Empire, a cleansing wave of sound and light. As the mimetic parasite was erased from their systems and their minds, the Zalosians felt a clarity they had not experienced in centuries. The dissonance in their society faded, replaced by a new, more complex and more beautiful harmony, one born not of uniform agreement, but of shared vulnerability and mutual respect. Lyra worked closely with the human ambassador, communicating through a holographic interface. Eva Rostova appeared as a simple bipedal form, clad in a plain, dark uniform. She had none of the regal bearing of a Zalosian leader, yet she commanded a quiet authority that Lyra found mesmerizing. Her face was an open book of subtle expressions, a concept alien to the Zalosians, whose emotions were broadcast through the resonance of their entire bodies. You said your people have experience with this kind of contagion, Lyra resonated one cycle, as they collaborated on cleansing the deepest, oldest sectors of the archive. Were they created by your own kind? Rostova's image looked away for a moment, her gaze distant. Some were, she said, her voice soft. In our infancy as a global civilization, we weaponized information, ideology, and belief. We learned the hard way how to inoculate ourselves against ideas that kill from the inside. But the sickness you were afflicted with, this is not of human design. It is far older, more refined, more patient. You have encountered it before? Lyra asked, a new chill seeping into her thoughts. Our probes have found its traces in the ruins of other civilizations out in the silent arms of the galaxy, Rostova replied. Dead worlds where the data ghosts speak of a slow descent into paranoia and civil war. Always the same pattern. A promising species reaches a certain level of technological and social complexity, and then the sickness appears. It isolates them, turns them into their own executioners. It's a filter. A great filter, designed to keep species from reaching true interstellar maturity. A profound silence settled between them. The initial crisis with humanity seemed to shrink, becoming a mere prelude to a far more terrifying revelation. Designed, Lyra finally echoed, by whom? Before Rostova could answer, an alert chimed through the communication channel. It came from one of Lyra's own archivist teams, working in the deepest core of the archive, in a section of memory that had been sealed for millions of years. The human harmonic purge in cleansing the mimetic sickness had also stripped away a layer of deep code camouflage that had hidden something else. A signal, one that the sickness had apparently been designed to suppress. Ambassador Prime Resonator, a panicked Zylosian technician chimed in. We've found something, a data store buried beneath our own foundational records. It doesn't use our architecture, it's ancient, alien to us. It was walled off, hidden by the very contagion you've been purging. Show me, Valerius commanded from the chamber of resonant thought. On the main view screen and on Lyra's private monitor, a new set of data appeared. It was a star map, but not of their galaxy. It depicted the vast, empty void between galaxies, and in that void there were things. They were not ships, they were not fleets. The data struggled to represent them, showing them as geometric impossibilities, as regions of spacetime that were fundamentally wrong. They were vast, galaxy-sized structures that were utterly dark, consuming all light, all energy, all matter that drifted too close. They were moving slowly, glacially through the intergalactic medium, and they were all moving toward their own galaxy. Embedded within the map was a message, translated by the human and Zylosian systems simultaneously. It was a desperate, fading echo from a civilization that called themselves the Architects, a species that had clearly existed eons before the Zylosians had even evolved. If you are reading this, then the quarantine has failed, the translated text read, its tone one of utter despair. The silence, the mimetic plague you know as the sickness, was our creation, a last, desperate defense. We could not fight the feeders that move in the long dark, so we tried to hide. We built the silence to infect every developing world, to keep them quiet, to keep them from shining too brightly, from broadcasting their existence into the void. We hoped it would keep you all trapped in your cradles, squabbling amongst yourselves, never looking up to see the true wolves. It was a monstrous act, but we saw no other choice. To be loud is to be seen. To be seen is to be harvested. The message continued, a horrifying testament to a long-lost war. The feeders were cosmic predators that hibernated for millions of years in the void, awakening to consume entire galaxies, stripping them of all life, all energy, all matter, before returning to their long slumber. The Architects had tried to fight, but their weapons were useless against beings that seemed to exist partially outside of normal spacetime. Their final act was to create and disseminate the silence, hoping to save other galaxies by plunging them into a forced dark age. But their plague had evolved, grown more virulent than they intended, ensuring civilizations destroyed themselves rather than simply remaining quiet. The feeders are waking, the message concluded, the signal degrading into static. We can hear their song in the dark. We are the last echo of this galaxy. Forgive us and hide. The message ended. In the chamber of resonant thought, there was a silence that was not of awe or fear, but of absolute soul-crushing terror. Every resonator, every Zylosian watching, felt the scale of their existence shrink to a single, fragile point of light in an infinite, hungry darkness. Their millennia-long peace, their belief in their own supremacy, their recent conflict with humanity, it was all a drama played out in a child's nursery while monsters stirred outside the door. Valerius looked at the star map, at the silent, encroaching shapes in the void. He looked at the image of the lone human ship, the emissary, which now seemed not like a powerful warship or a wise physician's vessel, but like a single candle lit against a hurricane. He opened the channel to Ambassador Ristova again. Her holographic image was still, her face grim. She had seen the message, too. The calm, professional demeanor was gone, replaced by a gravity that matched his own. The great existential question that had haunted the conclave for cycles, why did humanity send only one ship, had been answered. It had been an act of incredible wisdom and empathy. But now, standing before this new, galactic-scale abyss, a new question had formed, one that Valerius knew would define the future of both their species, and perhaps all life in the galaxy. He looked at the human ambassador, the representative of a young, chaotic race that had risked everything for a principle of healing, a race that had seen the sickness in their soul when they themselves were blind. And he resonated the only question that now mattered. Ambassador Ristova, Valerius said, his voice no longer the sound of a ruler but of a partner, a future ally. How many ships must we build together?